Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 163 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Gavin. Here with me is Liz.
Hi.
Hi, my wonderful wife. Today, as well as next episode, are going to be just the two of us. Mike and Fia are elsewhere. Not because of scheduling conflicts or anything like sometimes happens, mostly because Liz and I are elsewhere. We sort of revealed in a past episode, like a couple episodes ago, that I'm having a baby, and
just him. I'm kidding.
We are having a baby.
We are having a baby
real soon. In fact, if I have the calendar right in my head, the baby's probably going to be born the day this goes out, maybe the following day, depending on exactly how things go. But yeah, so we're pre-recording a couple things, and since originally this episode and next episode were going to be just bonus episodes, I made the decision to basically make them full episodes. That way, we don't have to stress about planning podcast episodes and recording them and me doing the editing and everything when we have a newborn. So, yeah. Good job, past self. Yeah. So this episode, we're going to be talking about Walking with Dinosaurs, the 1999 miniseries by the BBC, because they just put out sort of a sequel series. Just at the time you're hearing this, probably a couple of weeks ago, probably close to a month ago. It came out in the UK several weeks before that, but this is a little series that was really important to me for a couple reasons I'll talk about. Liz had thought she'd seen it, but apparently has not.
No, and it was funny because when we started watching it, I was thought, maybe it's just pregnancy brain kicking in, that maybe I don't remember. But at some point when Gavin and I were dating, he was living in South Dakota and I had already moved back to California, and he was talking about some dinosaur show, and he's like, yeah, you should watch it. So I did. It was COVID. I think I even watched it with my mom, partly, and I was like, yeah, that's what I watched. And then I kept waiting for it to seem familiar, and it took half an episode for me to be like, yeah, no, I definitely did not watch this.
And so after, her saying that, I got to thinking, I'm like, I have no idea what that could be.
Have you figured it out yet?
No.
Oh, crap.
Because we watched Prehistoric Planet together. At least the first season. I don't remember if we watched the second season, honestly. But yeah, we watched that together.
When we lived together.
Right.
Yeah.
I have no idea what else was around the time.
Listen, I wasn't dating any other paleontologist, so if it was something recommended, it had to come from you.
Oh, no, I believe you. I just don't know what it could have been. So, so with that, we're going to talk about Walking with Dinosaurs in this episode, so spoilers for a 26-year-old documentary that, if you're a listener of this podcast, I'm sure you've seen before. Some light spoilers probably for Prehistoric Planet. I'm going to mention it a couple times. I don't have a script or anything. I just took some light notes while we were watching it. But yeah, I'm going to compare it a little bit to Prehistoric Planet, since that was also made by BBC and at the time was kind of seen as a spiritual successor to Walking with Dinosaurs. And just sort of, comparing it, because it made by the same company, about vaguely the same things, same vague production quality for the time. We have not seen the new one yet.
Correct.
So we will probably watch that in the next, a week.
Yeah.
But before, to make sure we, watch it before the baby comes. But yeah. So, we'll kind of go through the episodes and just sort of talk about my musings. But first, overall thoughts. What did you think of it?
I enjoyed it. It definitely, I think would have been more intriguing maybe when I was younger.
That's fair.
More captivating. Now it was I kind of scrolled on my phone at the same time and did my Wordle for the day. But I enjoyed it, and I laughed at a few points, and I got nervous at a few points. I covered my eyes at a few points, and that's saying something because.
Well, the covering your eyes was mostly for the single, the single snake. Hey,
it doesn't matter why I did it. The fact is, I did it.
That's fair. Yeah, so this has always been kind of a interesting documentary for me because, like, obviously I watched it here and there when I was a kid, but when I was working at the museum, when I was during my master's, I worked at the museum that we had on campus at the South Dakota School of Mines, and this was sort of one part of three separate like paleontology Walking With series that the BBC made around this time. There was Walking With Dinosaurs, probably the most famous one. Walking With Monsters, I think that one was called. That one was about the Paleozoic, so like all the stuff before the dinosaurs. And then Walking With Prehistoric Beasts, maybe it was just Beasts, I don't remember, which was all the stuff after the dinosaurs. And so the museum had all three of those on DVD. And so when I would work there, I would put them on, and they would sort of show in the kids section, which was right behind like the front desk. So like, I don't remember who I was talking to about this, I think yesterday, but I know almost word for word the entire thing, but I'm like, I only heard it a lot of the time. I didn't actually know what was happening a lot. So like, I could hear all of it, but I didn't see the visuals. So like,
that's funny.
In my mind, the visuals held up a lot better than they actually did upon rewatching it here. Oh, also off the top, you can watch this, I'm sure, in various places for free, but the place we watched it was on the Internet Archive, on the the Wayback Machine, which was really cool that it was just on there for free. So there'll be a link to that down below if you want to watch late 90s CGI. Be my guest. But yeah, so overall, it's really interesting seeing where the science was at the time, because more of it is still pretty good than I would have thought. There is some stuff that they got wrong. Obviously, no documentary is perfect. But this one has always kind of been, again, maybe this is just me headcanoning it because it came out when I was little. But this has always, to me, been like the gold standard for like documentaries in terms of like being right or like as correct as you can reasonably expect to be. But I ended up having a couple of the same things with it. Like, I wouldn't even call them problems, more comments that I did with Prehistoric Planet. And that's kind of why I wanted to tie that in eventually. But we'll get into sort of the episodes here. So the first one,
I would also like to point out that Gavin took notes. I did not.
Yeah, no. If that just ain't the
the personality differences between us.
Yeah, episode 1 kind of gives like a brief intro to like the 3 different periods of the Mesozoic, the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. But for the most part, it takes place in sort of the middle to late Triassic. And again, my first note is CGI doesn't quite hold up at first. I think in later episodes it gets a little better, especially there's an episode that focuses mainly on the oceans, which makes the color grading weird, and I think that benefits the 30-year-old CGI. But depending on what creature they're talking about, the animatronics I thought were actually pretty decent. I
loved the animatronics and puppetry.
Yeah, those were amazing. Some of them were really derpy. I'm thinking of the Utah Raptors in one of the later episodes of it just like popping its head out behind a bush, and it literally looked like it would fit in the dinosaurs.
I was gonna bring up dinosaurs.
I don't remember what company made it, but it's on Disney Plus, I think.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah,
was it not PBS or something like that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But yeah, the like kind of sitcom from the 90s. But I definitely could have fit in there.
But I loved that.
Yeah. One thing that I also really appreciated was all the various practical effects. So like when the dinosaurs would like run through a puddle or like jump on a log or something, like this is something I think we take a little bit for granted now with CGI stuff, but they would just like CGI that splash of water, even if it is like filmed in like a real place, if the whole scene isn't CGI. But here it's like they had some kind of device under the water that like made a little splash wherever the dinosaur stepped. And I'm sure that actually made things easier for the animators too. But there was stuff like that whenever, they had a dinosaur like eating some leaves off a tree. They made the tree move, like
drop leaves.
Yeah, or even they had like maybe a piece of fishing line tied to it and moved it up and down or something like that. But I think that helps.
That's an art form.
Yeah,
it truly is.
That makes the CGI feel a lot better, even if by 2025 standards it doesn't look the best.
No, because definitely when it was more CGI, like when it wasn't using the puppets and everything or the animatronics, I felt like my eyes weren't focusing, and it would almost make me a little dizzy. Like it just didn't seem, like I was really there.
Yeah, that's definitely not you. That's definitely the CGI. I think they kind of do that when things are moving fast. They put like too much motion blur on it so that you don't catch that it doesn't run like a normal animal would.
But they used it a lot.
They did. Yeah. But yeah, same things with like dirt and stuff. All the puppets and the practical effects I thought all looked really good.
So out of curiosity, can you name my favorite moment out of the whole 6 episodes that we watched?
Was it the eggs?
No.
Then no.
It was when it was the mammal when they were throwing the moss and dirt at it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that toward the end. That was in the last episode.
But basically, there was like a predator that was trying to get to like a nest of eggs, and the adult started like flinging
just like stuff at it, and it was. We'll talk about that. No, we can talk about it here for a sec because this kind of goes into like the practical effects part of it. So, there, especially in the later episodes, there's 6 of them. So they used actual footage of a couple of animals. So like they did it earlier on with insects, because it's like, well, we can just go out and film dragonflies. That's easy enough for them to do, so they don't have to CG them. But in episode, it was 6, the last one. They showed some of. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? No, it was episode 5. Yeah. They had actual footage of a coati, which is like a South Central American, relative of raccoons, but it's like just strange enough looking of a mammal that most like northern audiences probably aren't familiar with it. So you're like, yeah, that could be something from the past, but it was just actual footage of the animal walking around in the forest. And
there had to be a person that was like literally like in the back behind the camera throwing moss and dirt at it. Yeah. And I was like, that's my dream job.
Yeah, please. It was so the premise of this little scene was that it was trying to like steal from a nest or something. And the like parents of the nest were like kicking dirt and stuff at it. But like at first I thought they were just gonna show it, coming up to a nest, then cut to like the adult kicking sand or whatever, and then the coati just walking away. No, they literally had somebody just like throwing clumps of moss at this thing, and it understandably was like, "Oh, what?" and ran away. So,
and I do really like coatis. I got to see them when I was in Panama.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
they're fun, and I was just like, wait a second.
Yeah, they. A strange choice that they picked that instead of some kind of marsupial or like a rat or something.
Again, if you didn't have any knowledge about the animal and you just like were an American or even like a British person, I think, a layman's, and just saw this animal, you're like, yeah, that's not a thing anymore.
Yeah, but one of the few things where I'm like, there was definitely a potentially more like accurate option that they seemingly actively chose not to do. But
on the next episode, we'll have the director of the film. No, I'm kidding.
No, that's a joke. But yeah, they did that with a couple things. So they had in episode 6, the last one, they had a snake that some like baby T-Rexes were harassing. Seemingly, that was a very real snake that they were harassing with some puppets. is what it looked like to me.
I wouldn't know. I had my eyes closed.
That's true. Yeah, it looked like a reticulated python or some other very large snake. Let's see, what else? They showed a tuatara, which, that was, fairly accurate. They had a lot of relatives around at the time and were... this was probably a little past their time because they're not quite lizards. They're a little different than lizards. But they were much more common, especially in the Jurassic. I think probably by the late Cretaceous, it was probably lizards. And then a giant type of cricket that we still have today called wettas. No, I guess that was also episode 5. But yeah, so they did use some real footage of animals on top of, all the CG and puppets. So I think that definitely added a nice touch. Harder to do that for the earlier ones, though.
Yeah.
Just because, in the...
Again, you did mention the dragonflies, damselflies. There was a few things that they used, but for the most part.
Yeah. But yeah, so let's get into some of the episodes. So the first one, like I said, mid to through the late Triassic, I guess. And it was really interesting. My first note, other than the CGI stuff, is just lungfish mentioned, which I love. Lungfish are very fun. I think they're really weird fish. Mostly because they're fairly related to, all the rest of the tetrapods. But lungfish do definitely feel like an old type of fish.
Now, I apologize, so I'm not going to remember all of the different names of different things like you do. Was that the really colorful one that was in the shallow water that they showed? At the beginning? Probably
yes.
Okay, yeah. I'm pretty sure, because from that episode and from what you're describing.
I think it was the only fish shown in that episode. But yeah, it does a really good job of showing that the Triassic was kind of a hellscape. Yeah, the Triassic was not a fun time for most of it. This was when Pangea was mostly together still. It was sort of breaking up through the late Triassic into the Jurassic, mostly gone by early Jurassic. But yeah, with it being just a single large landmass, the center of it is just really far from the ocean. So if you're not pretty close to the coasts, most of Pangea was just a big old desert. And so it did a really good job of showing that. So and going to all these real life locations to film all of it, that they then put the CG in, I think was really good as well. I think that definitely adds a lot to it instead of having the whole scene be CG.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I don't know how the new one is going to be, how much of that they're going to do. I haven't really seen too much from it, honestly. But
we can only speculate. Yeah. But no, I didn't like the real scene. And I liked how it would tell you, afterwards, where it was filmed. So in the credits, it would say, where.
A lot of New Zealand. Which doesn't surprise me. New Zealand has very weird plants. Because that's always my first thought. With stuff like this, is okay, where are they going to try to film this where there's not going to be flowering plants everywhere? Especially for Triassic and Jurassic stuff, because those just don't exist, and that's 90% of plants today.
Well, was it the first or second episode that they were in the redwoods?
Probably the second one.
The second one?
Yeah.
Which, as someone that has grown up in California and been around the redwoods, I was heck yeah, that's my home. I recognize you.
But yeah, so there's not a lot of places you can go. But there was a lot of New Zealand, some Chile, some Australia. But yeah. One thing that kind of bothered me from the beginning, so there's a handful of main species in each episode. So for this first one, it is mostly non-dinosaurs. I think there's only 2 dinosaurs in the entire first episode, and it's Coelophysis, little early dinosaur. I think it's a theropod, but it might be just outside theropods. I don't know. And then at the very end, just has Plateosaurus, an early sauropod. The rest of it are synapsids or crocodilla forms or crocodilomorphs, Suchians, some kind of crocodile relative thing.
And I'm really sorry, but when you say crocodilla, it sounds like one of those restaurants that's has a kids menu version of a quesadilla, cut out as a crocodile. Would you like a crocodilla?
I've never heard that once.
No, it's not a thing. I'm just saying, just like a quesadilla, just a really whitewashed version, and then their Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Nope. All right, folks. It's fine.
But yeah, so the main ones, especially early, are Placerius, which I'm actually going to look that up. I meant to look that up beforehand. I'm pretty sure that's a synapsid. Yes, Placerius is a synapsid, but they kept referring to it as like a reptile to some extent. And I think this is just a shift in how we talk about synapsids. Because even when I first started like in community college, maybe this is just like, the effect of what you learn in classes being lagged behind actual research. Like it's been a very long time since like researchers thought that synapsids were reptiles, but the term like mammal-like reptiles hung around for a really long time. And I think this is kind of a part of that because they are not reptiles by pretty much anybody's definition. But they kept calling them that, and I think that was just sort of that lag between, especially something that's supposed to be public-facing.
I think you're gonna be a really harsh critic of the second one.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think you're gonna hold it to a really high standard. Like, if it
probably
just came out, like, they've had every, resource available to them thanks to the internet, and I think you're gonna, be a stickler and hold it to a high standard.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's been 30 years, so it should be better than the last one. But yeah, another thing, so that's sort of the main, like, prey animal of the episode is Placerius. Then there's Postosuchus. That's the sort of large, terrestrial crocodilian relative, sort of the large predator of the episode. But sort of the main characters, I think, were Coelophysis and Cynodonts. They made a couple of assumptions or inferences that I'm not sure how much evidence there was, like, even now.
Listen, they're storytelling. I mean,
right,
it was building a scene. It was creating like a... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, were you not going to finish that? Or?
No, I didn't want to interrupt you, and then you stopped, and I stopped at the same time. But, they were trying to build a sense of, like, you were there. They were storytelling and projecting, like, a possible scenario of, like, what we would be seeing if they were right in front of us. And, yeah, no, like, none of it is, like, backed up by science, like, at all. But, I understand why they did it.
Right, and in a documentary like this about extinct animals, you can't help but make inferences, otherwise it would be a very boring documentary.
Very short.
But the two things that I specifically was like, I'm surprised they said this, was that these cynodonts, which I don't think they gave a particular species for, cynodont is like a group, not a species, is that they showed them, like, providing milk for their offspring, as well as laying eggs. And they are at this kind of, which obviously we have, like, platypus and echidnas and monotreme that do both of those things today. But cynodonts are at kind of a weird spot in the mammal family history where it's like, they could have done either. And I don't think we have good evidence either way.
It was a hot take.
Yeah. But that's one where I'm like, I'm not sure which one I would have liked them to do. And this is kind of when my brain went to Prehistoric Planet, because my biggest gripe with that was that they would often show, like, different anatomy or behaviors for things that, like, isn't, like, that hot of an inference to make, but there is no evidence for it. So one of the most, like, striking things that they use in a lot of the commercials for Prehistoric Planet was the sauropod with, like, the neck balloons. I don't believe there's evidence for any sauropod having those, let alone, like, that particular species, but they present it as if it is true.
Fact. Yeah.
And that was, like, the example that sticks out the most in my mind. Whereas this one is kind of in the same vein.
I get that. Yeah, I can see that.
But, yeah, I don't know how much evidence, if any, besides just like, yeah, it's mammal-y, so it probably could produce milk. But it's like, obviously milk-producing organs are not going to preserve for, 230 million years.
Right.
So, so I don't know where the current research is on that, but that was definitely something where I'm like, enough to sort of like make me question it. They showed some early pterosaurs. Didn't really go too much into them. They have a whole episode dedicated to pterosaurs later. They also gave a ballpark length of like how long it took cynodonts to mature.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, which also again I'm like, it's the milk thing is like, I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to show that like this more mammal-like lineage is cares for its young, which is different than a lot of the reptile lineages at the time. And that's sort of what makes them different. So trying to show this like family dynamic, and the milk sort of helps with that. But that one, like, you could have left that out and nothing would have been lost. So, but the entire episode, the cynodonts were just like endlessly being picked on by this group of coelophysis. And it had big like mammals under the boot of the dinosaurs energy, which also was a lot more prevalent of like the headspace at the time, where it's like, no, mammals were doing fine like the entire time. It really wasn't dinosaurs like
versus,
right, like mammals were just doing their own thing throughout all the Mesozoic while dinosaurs were doing their thing. Their time just it just didn't happen for them. But that's always kind of how I learned it growing up, is that once the big nasty dinosaurs were gone, then the mammals could step in.
Oh yeah, and I've heard that too, for sure.
That's pretty much all I had about episode 1. Did you have any other thoughts without taking notes?
Well, I mean, I almost like, again, I don't want to use spoilers, but it did not end well for that little family.
It didn't. They had to eat their babies in order to run away from the coelophysis.
And as someone that is like growing an offspring inside her own body, I'm like, that was it was a lot to take in. A lot to digest, if you will.
Oh God.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, it kind of also really glosses over the end Triassic mass extinction. It basically is like, yeah, all those non-dinosaurs, they got smoked, but dinosaurs came out great. Moving on to the next episode. That's pretty much all it said about it. But it was a pretty large mass extinction.
You would not pick that up just from like the show, though.
No, I think the world was in a weird time because it was about 50 million years after the biggest mass extinction at the end of the Permian. So like the world was still kind of recovering a bit. 50 million years, it was mostly back. At least terrestrial ecosystems, which is all we care about in this show, really. But yeah, the end Triassic, I think, is like number 3 in terms of like, species percentage lost. You would not have got that from this episode. And I don't know if that's because of research since that we better understand it or what, but yeah, so that's episode 1. Episode 2, I also really like throughout this because Prehistoric Planet, they were focused like in different places around the world, but just latest Cretaceous. Whereas this, they start in, when the first dinosaurs come around, and ends when the dinosaurs go extinct. Non-bird dinosaurs, obviously. But yeah, so now we're in the mid-Jurassic, and the episode opens up with a mother Diplodocus laying some eggs. Liz didn't like that. That grossed her out.
No.
Because
it was very graphic. Like, it was just like, they really made it a point. Like, that production team, they were sparing no cost.
They spared no expense.
And I was just a little taken aback. Like, it was well done.
Yeah.
I guess is what I should be more appreciative. It just was,
Well, because
I didn't anticipate being.
what it showed
so vividly shown
was, again, something that I don't think we have much evidence for because it's purely a soft body or soft anatomy feature. It's not bone in any way. But this giant sauropod, one of the largest sauropods ever, laying eggs with a tube. So, like, you know, they can't just, you know, squat all the way down to the ground, and eggs, very famously, are fragile.
Yeah, I mean, it's not laying a giraffe. Like, I get it. Like, yeah. Like,
yeah.
No, if I just had never considered it, and again, as someone that's not a paleontologist, you know, I realize they have cloacas, but like I never thought about the process of which.
Yeah, and it's you know if you think of like sea turtles, I believe they have some kind of tube as well, but like I don't think any birds do. I think they just pop them out. But birds can also just be on the ground or in their nest, you know.
Same thing with turtles.
Right, but they at least like sea turtles like dig.
Right, yeah.
And they can't really look at what they're doing back there. So, but yeah, with something as big as a sauropod, you know, when they lay
like,
eggs,
we are going to show you.
Yeah, it's like they can only get so close to the ground, so there's just like a big old tube, which again I think is speculative, but that's something that like again makes people think. I'd never really thought about that before, and that probably is what happened.
But I don't think it was just the tube that like caught me off guard. It was the fact that they put in, like I said, a lot of effort into the realism.
Very realistic.
It was very moist. It was very like, you know, so there was something releasing like some kind of liquid or something. Like, you know, they were a team.
Literally
artistry.
Also like 15 seconds into the episode. Like that's what you get hit with right at the beginning.
Versus humans, which, I mean, we're so clean and, like, you know, not traumatic during birth whatsoever.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
yeah.
But yeah, so this episode focuses almost entirely on sauropods. This is when sauropods were sort of at their peak diversity. I don't actually think we see any sauropods after this episode. I don't think so. Because the next one's about the oceans, the next one's about the pterosaurs, then the polar forests, and then the T-Rex. So we don't see any.
I definitely
besides
thought
here.
they went into the third episode, but they could all just be blending together. We watched like 3 in a row, and then we watched 3 in a row the next day. So,
but yeah, so I put in here. Liz liked that the baby sauropods are called sauropodlets.
It took very little to entertain me.
Yeah. But yeah, so it mainly focuses on Diplodocus as well as a couple other like very famous Jurassic species. But yeah, so it's these sauropods and basically tracks them from when they're all coming out of the ground, you know, hundreds at a time. Very like sea turtle style, where it's like swarm the predators with so much prey that they couldn't possibly eat all of them.
You can't take us all.
Exactly. Very Area 51.
Yes, thank you. That was definitely what I was trying to lay down.
They can't stop all of us. But yeah, another thing that they kind of showed here is that the main sort of predator for like the babies is a theropod called Ornitholestes, and it would not shut up. That's one thing that dinosaur documentaries are like kind of infamous for, is that like even when an animal should just be being an animal, it is constantly squawking or screaming or doing something. It's like, why? Our cats aren't constantly screaming.
Especially if like they're in like hunting mode and everything, but
right.
It just basically makes everything a seagull.
Yeah, there was big
seagull energy.
Yeah. But this one in particular, it's like almost any time it was on screen, unless it was being like deliberately stealthy, it was squawking or doing something. And I'm like, that I like it when dinosaurs are depicted as noisy because birds are very noisy. But when you do it just to do it, it kind of loses some of that value for me.
Again, it was, you know, the 90s, and I think they're just trying to fill in the void without having more overture of a person talking and describing what's happening.
That's
so
fair.
I'm not sure exactly what kind of music, like would they play Jaws or, you know.
Another interesting detail, so they showed it, what is presumably Camptosaurus, but they never actually mention it or anything. It's just kind of around, particularly like the Stegosaurus and things like that. So that's a small, it's not a theropod, but it walks on two legs. And they show some of its, relatives later, so it's similar to the ones from like the polar forest episode.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Sort of similar to those, but they would just kind of hang around the big herbivores and stuff. And I just thought that was really good, like, environmental storytelling, that, like, this environment is fuller than what we're talking about.
Right.
Another thing that I noticed particularly in this episode, but it kind of was a theme throughout the rest of it, almost everything had, like, very floppy tails.
That's really funny, because I actually did make a mental note where I was just like, is everything a mammal? Like, where it was very, like, kind of, like, almost waggy, like they were puppy tails.
And so the Diplodocus, that makes sense for them. Because at some point it mentioned that they, like, communicate with each other with their tails. Did not elaborate further. I don't know if it was implying that, like, if it waves it a certain way, that, like, the ones behind it in the herd, like, that's sort of them communicating some way. But also, it's just really long, and then by the end gets very thin. So, like, it would just kind of be waving around a little bit. But
that balance.
Yeah, but even the things, like, that should have, like, very stiff tails, like T-Rex in the last episode, was, like, very droopy. And I'm like, again, maybe that's just a more modern thing that I'm like, I'm almost positive we knew that they had very rigid tails at the time, but a difference in, like, the perception.
And those, like, animatronics people, they, like,
even the CG. I mean,
yeah.
But yeah, so that was where I kind of noticed it with the Diplodocus first, as well as the Stegosaurus and Allosaurus. Also, you can't sort of depict, because I think this was supposed to be Colorado in the mid-Jurassic, which is like dinosaur natural monument. Mm-hmm. You can't have that environment without Allosaurus. Allosaurus is very famous from there. It did a really good job, I think, of showing sauropods as, like, ecosystem engineers.
Yeah.
It's basically similar to how elephants are, where it's like, in environments, at least African elephants, Indian and Asian elephants, not as much, but in an environment where there are African elephants, there just can't be forest because the elephants knock down all the trees. They're like, get this out of here.
To get down to, like, the little, like,
yeah, because
ferns and everything that were going on.
Yeah,
and the narrator did a good job of, like, discussing that.
Yeah, and they also talked, there was probably a solid 30 to 45 seconds of just about their poop.
Okay. It's important.
Yeah. But, like, showing that, like, not only are they eating all this stuff, like, the whole point of sauropods is that they eat an ungodly amount of food every day. And it's like, well, they've got to also then make an ungodly amount of poop every day.
Yep.
And that was also some modern footage with some dung beetles and stuff.
That's right. I forgot about that. I forgot about that too.
But yeah, it's one big pile of poop.
Did you wonder, like, what kind of poop that maybe they used while filming that dung beetle?
Probably elephant, I would assume.
Yeah. I did think about that, though.
I didn't. But that's a good thought. But yeah, I even put in here everything but the theropods had very floppy tails. Allosaurus apparently was fine. But all the other theropods later had very floppy tails. Also, there's one Brachiosaurus. It's all else Diplodocus. But there's one single Brachiosaurus. Which I think there's just been a lot of work done on sauropods since then. Because it said the Brachiosaurus was the largest ever at 70 tons. And I just said, 1999. You were so simple.
All right, what's the answer, Gavin?
It depends. There's a number of them that are probably up around 100 tons. There's like Sauroposeidon, Argentinosaurus. None around really at that time. Maybe a couple. Brachiosaurus is definitely up there.
Yeah.
Giraffatitan, I think, is another one. But
that's just like a fact-checking thing that, like, would never have, like, caught my attention.
No, yeah. But again, it was just like, when you're making a documentary, I'd be cautious. Maybe this is just me because I'm a cautious person.
What?
But I wouldn't say anything is, like, especially in paleontology, like, the biggest ever. Because there will almost always be a bigger one sometime. But yeah. Let's see. They did the last kind of note I have for this episode is that they did a really good job of showing Allosaurus being very like agile, despite it being large. Like it's like running and action scenes weren't just like, because even with the T-Rex a little bit later in the last episode, it was very stompy and like not shown to be like agile, which T-Rex probably wasn't, and it's also considerably bit larger than Allosaurus. But it was good to see like a theropod that's not a dromaeosaur like a velociraptor being like agile and maneuverable, because they were like chase predators. So,
predators.
Yeah. But again, this is still sort of at the time where it's like that is not the public's depiction of them typically. Any other thoughts about?
No, not for that episode.
Yeah. All right. Next one, oceans. Still kind of mid to late Jurassic. This one I think was probably the one where there was the most wrong, or at least wrong now. The first one of the main characters of the episode, the Liopleurodon, I think looked really cool. I think the big one.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think it looked really good. Made a lot of sense. Way too big, like way too big. There are a number of reasons for this. I read a couple of things afterward and was like, yeah, no, they just got that wrong. Depending on which site you looked at, was like, no, they were just wrong. There's also some thoughts that like some people thought it could have gotten that big. They'd found a single vertebra in what later turned out to be, they thought it was the same like rock formation that Liopleurodon is from, and it was one of the biggest things in that, so they were like, oh, it must be from that, and this is a gigantic vertebra. So then they just kind of like extrapolated from that.
Right.
Turned out that was from a different formation. It was from a sauropod.
Yeah.
Not close. So they said that Liopleurodon could be like 25 meters long, which is like 80 foot. Not even close. Like half that is like the max of like current estimates for Liopleurodon. And
even like pause the show. We talked about that for
because I was like, I need to double check this or I'm going to go insane. But yeah, so that's one that was based on some like incorrect data, but even data that was like people thought was probably wrong at the time. So how it made it into the show is like
shock factor.
I don't know. Yeah. One of the biggest things though that I think would not stick out to basically anybody but a paleontologist as wrong today is the plesiosaurs on land.
Okay.
Early on in the episode, they talk about them having to come up on land to lay eggs. Not the case.
Oh.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I never thought that they did do that. Like, until watching this. And then, like, I was just like, oh, I know. I'm not a...
It makes sense if you think about it because to the layperson, reptiles lay eggs.
Yeah.
Even though there are lots of them that don't, there are lots of, especially snakes, there's a lot of snakes that don't lay eggs. But it was just like, well, they're reptiles, so yeah, they probably lay eggs. I mean, sea turtles come up onto land to lay eggs. Why wouldn't these guys? But to my knowledge, we've definitely never found like a nest or like a clutch of eggs. And it just kind of doesn't make sense because at one point, this particular genus, Cryptocleidos, they said was 8 tons. That's not
coming up on land.
That's not coming up on land.
And was that the same one that they were like, this one is 100 years old?
No, that was the big one.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, that was the Liopleurodon.
Yep, you're right.
Because, yeah, if you're 8 tons and you're not used to supporting your own body weight because you live in the water, you are not lasting on land.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, not even just to lay eggs, like, if for whatever reason you could not evolve, like, evolution just was not working with you and you had to lay eggs, you'd figure something out, but if that was the only time you needed to come up on land, but a couple times said that they would come up on land just to like sun themselves or to get out of the water so they weren't around
predators.
the Liopleurodon. But no.
No.
So I don't think we've found a like pregnant plesiosaur.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely have with ichthyosaurs, which was sort of one of the other main characters of this episode. I think it was Ophthalmosaurus. But it shows them giving live birth, and I thought it was interesting that it said that they gave birth
backwards,
tail first, which I think we do actually have fossils like mid-birth where really that's cool. The case. But that just makes sense for an air-breathing animal.
And they went into that, like again, the narrator did an excellent job about discussing like the risks and like why that happens and what happens if like a baby gets stuck and the mom can't go for air, and it was a very like kind of nail-biter situation for as much as this show can get.
Yeah, it definitely had the the documentary stereotype where it's like, you see this really cute thing? Yeah.
Here comes the predator.
Here's why you should care about it. Yeah. It's now in mortal danger.
Oh
no! But yeah, it also very, very briefly mentioned turtles, like sea turtles. Maybe even showed one for like just a brief second.
I think it showed one in it
was
5th or 6th episode.
No, I remember what it was. It showed it being scavenged, a dead one.
Correct.
Being scavenged. That was this episode.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it took place mostly around like Europe. Because that's where there's a lot of really good like marine fossils from the Jurassic in Europe. But it showed a turtle shell being scavenged by some some kind of theropods that just sort of island hopped. It also showed one swimming, which Liz thought
that was so funny.
Yeah. It was doing like a doggy paddle basically.
But yeah, I don't know. It was just very entertaining. Like
it looked very goofy.
I don't know what to say. Like, people are gonna watch this and be like, "Wow, her bar of like humor is so low," and that is correct.
And I think there is definitely value to documentaries making, especially ones about prehistoric animals, making them look goofy, because like sometimes animals just do goofy stuff, and so I think that's genuinely helpful when they do that. But yeah, so I had to look it up. I'm like, I didn't think turtles were quite that old, but yeah, apparently they are. Like true turtles. There's lots of other things that are like very turtle-y that are not related to turtles at all that has kind of shells, but no, turtles, I guess, sea turtles by like mid-Jurassic. So.
There was a handful of things like that where you're like, huh.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure it's in the next episode or the next episode. We'll get to it. We'll get to it.
And the last thing, they kept showing sharks also.
Yeah, they did.
Which no problem with having sharks, but they had like spines on their fins.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, which there are no groups of sharks today that have that, and that's typically associated with a different group that I think the current consensus is that sharks came from them.
Okay.
Called acanthodians. I'm looking up when they went extinct. Because I thought they didn't make it to the Jurassic, but maybe I'm wrong.
So were those spines paid actors or CGI?
They might have been paid actors. Yeah, there was no... this was one where I think they probably could have used real footage of a shark, but didn't.
They did not, yeah.
Yeah, so they probably could have, but chose not to for one reason or another. But yeah, it does not seem like... this group called, like I said, acanthodians. They're sometimes like colloquially called spiny sharks, but they were extinct by this time. So I don't know how factual those spines on that shark were. But anywho, next episode, which I think was the most memeable of all of them, was about the pterosaurs. So this is in like the earliest part of the Cretaceous. Mostly focusing on a single individual ornithopyrus.
It was very funny. Like,
yeah, and it's like the episode started off basically like, this guy died. Let's watch how it happened.
It definitely had I think the most commentary that we had of any episode.
Like in between us.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, so focusing on Ornithocheirus, which at the time was thought to be one of like the largest pterosaurs, no longer thought to be the case. I don't know why they thought this in particular, because even still, Ornithocheirus is only known from fragmentary parts of like the snout, so like no wing material or anything. I don't know, but yeah, they say it's had was roughly the size of like Quetzalcoatlus. No, so today it's kind of only estimated to be probably about a 5 meter wingspan, which is still big. 18 feet or so. That's pretty big, but not the 40-45 foot.
Yeah, the mother of all.
Yeah. And it's a little bit different than the Liopleurodon situation, where it's like, that I really don't know where it came from. This was just what the thought was at the time. So, like, not factually wrong. We've just learned more since then. They do very briefly mention, and I had to rewind it because they've said it so quickly, that pterosaurs had fur. At one point, basically he's making this mating journey from South America up to North America, and then across the Atlantic to Europe.
And he was getting rained on, and so he had to take shelter.
Yeah, but it's mentioned fur, and I was like, that's a curious way to phrase it, because it's like vaguely feathery, like down feathers.
Well, they even said down fur, didn't they? Or am I projecting that? I may have just inserted that.
But yeah,
listeners, if you are watching this, please let us know, because I'm not gonna go back through and watch it again.
But yeah, so I just thought that was interesting, because normally pterosaurs are, at this time, were depicted very naked. And that was something that I kind of noted for later in the episode. This whole documentary, less so up to this point, but a bit. Everything is very, in paleontology, especially like paleo art community, is called shrink-wrapped. Where the skin is like incredibly tight over the muscles.
Yeah.
And like, especially on the carnivores, no body fat basically at all.
Yeah.
And so the pterosaurs, that's like the least egregious, because they probably were.
Yeah, if they're flying and everything. Yeah. I get that. But it was unsettling looking. Like, I made a few comments where I'm just like, ooh, this just looks very alien.
Yeah, because if they're standing, they're until you get to like their neck, they look like vaguely human-y.
I was gonna say it was like a cryptid of some kind.
Yeah. And then something I kind of noted later is that at no point in this entire series, even in this episode, focusing on pterosaurs, do we see a pterosaur take off from the ground.
Yeah. Nope.
And I realized that probably about 3/4 of the way through this episode. And I didn't want to rewind it to rewatch the whole episode, but like I'm pretty sure, and that's mostly because we hadn't figured out how they did it yet.
Which, like, right on. Like, if you don't know, like, there's, they were like, we're not even gonna, like,
there's there's a couple of times where it very much, like, the edit does a clever job of making you think that you just saw it do it, but at no point. You sometimes see some of the smaller ones, like in the sauropod episode, there's, I think it was Rhamphorhynchus or some other small pterosaur that, like, lived on the backs of these Diplodocus, where, like, they'll be clinging to the side, and they, like, let go and fly. That's one thing, but we never see any of them take off, like, from the ground. Which would... I didn't really know how to feel about that, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. But yeah, so it basically sort of travels, like I said, South America, up to North America, and then over. And it sort of...
Will he find love?
Yeah, that was kind of the thing. The entire time, it's like, this dominant male.
And he was like he was an older one. Like, he was experienced. Yeah. Like, if he was going back to his same place of, like, dominance, he'd be going right to the center and, like, show him who's boss and, easily find a mate there in the center.
And then it's like, psych, this guy's old.
So he got booted to the outskirts.
Yeah.
And then I was talking about, but it was so hot and it was so, so warm, but he couldn't give up the hope of finding a mate, so he kept doing, just like his presentations and everything like that, and hoping a female would come, and unfortunately, they never did.
Never did.
And he was so tired and exerted that he expired.
Yeah, but it as he's sort of flying, it shows a handful of other species that like kind of show up along the way. Right at the beginning, there's a genus of pterosaur called Tapejara or Tapejara. I don't know if you pronounce the H or not, or the J as an H or as a J. But they had this brightly colored head crest, and they were just like, the puppet they had for that was just very funny to me.
I didn't think it was funny. I don't know. I just liked all of the puppets. Like, I truly thought they were really beautifully done. And some of them were so colorful and just exquisite to look at. Like, truly. Like, from like a film perspective, I'm like, these people did a really good job. It's an art form, for sure. Yeah.
And so as he's sort of flying, it basically... they made a very interesting choice. I don't know if this was the thought at the time, but it's not now. So it basically showed him flying over like a herd of iguanodon being hunted by Utah raptor in North America. And then once he got to Europe, it showed what they said was a different species of iguanodon being hunted by a different species of Utah raptor. And both of those are wrong. Iguanodon, I think, is just a Europe, and Utah raptor is just a North America. And I'm like, you had other options.
Another thing that I just never noticed.
Right, but this is the kind of thing where I'm like...
You're supposed to be educating people.
Yeah.
Like myself.
I'm like, it's called Utah raptor. Yeah. I don't think you're finding it in Spain. Which also is part of the problem of naming species and things after places. I think that's something that we kind of try not to do these days, although it obviously still happens. But so that was one thing. It's like when it said Utah raptor after it arrived in Europe, I was like, yeah, that's news to me. It also definitely, it's still the 90s. Utah raptor had no feathers, even though we now know it almost certainly did.
Mm-hmm. Which is one of the things I'm excited for with the new one, is how they're going to have adapted.
Mm-hmm. The Utah raptors were extremely shrink-wrapped. Yeah. They were super shrink-wrapped. The herbivores weren't as much. They were very fleshy. It also showed the very stereotypical dromaeosaurs pack hunting, which there is very limited evidence that they did. But that's just since Jurassic Park, mostly. Anytime you see something related to Velociraptor hunting, it's almost always going to be in a pack.
It's almost like sex cells. It's like there's something about like certain storylines within dinosaurs that they feel the need to add in to make it what the people want to see. Yeah. And they're like, you can't tell us otherwise, so put that sticker on.
Yeah. One thing that I also thought was really funny, at one point when this Dinochirus is flying around, it just gets harassed by a bunch of birds. Just like a bunch of little birds.
They're pretty.
Yeah. They used it as sort of like a, hey, this is the future for all pterosaurs.
Yeah, they did imply that.
They get replaced by birds. But like, every now and then I see like a pretty big bird getting harassed by just like a little sparrow, and I always think it's so funny.
It's fantastic. Like a really impressive hawk that is just getting absolutely bombarded.
And I love the idea that happened to even like the big pterosaurs back then. And then overall go through the mating scenes. Like at the beginning there's the mating scenes or the mating like courtship stuff for like the Tapejara, and then at the end for the Dinochirus. And like those, obviously we don't really have evidence for like how any particular species had, these different mating courtship rituals or whatever. But I thought they did a good job. Yeah. Next episode. Which, like, conceptually, I think is my favorite, just because it's about an environment that is just so fundamentally foreign to the world today. But yeah, so this whole episode, still like mid-Cretaceous, is about polar forests. So back then, there were no permanent ice sheets like there are today. But, the Earth was still tilted back then. So the poles, for half the year...
Long winters.
Long winter. And so there weren't glaciers and things, but they still had, several months of darkness at a time. Including cold, obviously.
I think this was my favorite as far as, like, the cinematography goes.
Yeah, this one was really good.
But, yeah, not as, like, funny or memeable as episode 5.
Yeah, it starts off the episode with a Koolasuchus, which is really fun. I really like Koolasuchus. It's just a really fun and very derpy looking... we remarked several times about how goofy it looked with, like, its giant head and then its teeny tiny little legs.
Yeah.
But yeah, Koolasuchus is one of the last genera of, like, the very large amphibians, very salamander-like.
Very salamander-looking, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think it wasn't, like, a salamander as we, like, understand them today. So before...
But if you're my mom, Molly, just picture a salamander in the water and times it by, a massive amount.
But probably, like, 10 foot long.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also with a much larger head. But yeah, so these basically...
It did have a little bit of, like, an axolotl vibe. Like, where it was just, like, that dumb looking.
Yeah.
Where you're like, that head is empty. There's no thoughts.
Yeah, well, salamander. But with eyes, like, sort of at the very top. Very, like, flat head, like a crocodile, almost. But, so these were sort of the main predators around when, like, life was first starting, to come up on land, or at least vertebrates. And, in other places around the world over time, they got replaced by various reptiles and things. But down at the poles, it was too cold for, crocodilians or and their relatives. So Koolasuchus was able to hang on all the way through until, like, the early Cretaceous, which is really cool. They made it make sounds, though, which was kind of weird. Like, every now and then, especially when it was on land, it would kind of, like, grunt as it walked, like a very salamandery walk. And I'm like,
it sounds like me when I'm walking right now.
And it's like, yeah, amphibians do make sounds, like frogs, obviously. Yeah. I don't.
But there's like a social reason for it,
right? I do not think there are any salamanders that make sounds.
I honestly don't know.
Most of them don't have lungs.
In all my time as an animal scientist, there were, like, different people who were herpetologists and, like, herpers and stuff that I hung out with, but I myself, like, never did much of that. I mostly focused on, like, farm animals and, like, domestics. A little bit on wildlife, but primarily mammals then and predators. And my whole life I've caught in, like, one salamander. Mm. Yeah.
Probably smart. They're fragile little guys.
Well, I mean, so the reason I've seen other ones, like, I've taken pictures and, like, who doesn't like picking up a log or, like, a rock when you're, like, by the creek and seeing what's under there. But it was when I was in South Dakota and they were doing, like, a lot of construction on, like, this neighborhood, and my housemates had just built their house and there was construction going on in, like, the yard, and they were redoing stuff. And the point is, they, like, took a scoop of dirt and they, like, picked up the salamander. So they're like, we don't know what to do with this. Like, let's go call our roommate. So they called me over. And so, of course, I document, I take pictures, and I posted it on iNaturalist, which is something that was first introduced to me at the time by my supervisor. And he was super jealous. He was like, no joke, like, can I kind of come over so I can have that documented on my iNat?
That's really funny. But yeah, overall, like, there's not a ton to sort of comment on about this episode. We already talked about a couple things, like the Coati. And they also showed Tuatara and the Weta. At one point, the only, like, theropod that they show, they keep calling just a polar allosaur. And that's something I caught Prehistoric Planet kind of doing every now and then when they talked about something that hasn't been given a name yet. I don't know what they were, like what species they were talking about, but some kind of allosaur relative that lived down there. They just kept calling it the polar allosaur.
Does.
Sure.
I say sarcastically.
So, yeah, I'm sure there probably was something else for them to use instead of that, but then again, Antarctica, we don't have a lot of fossils in there. It's a hard place to look for them.
But again, very fun cinematography where they would use like real life animals with a mixture of, not much CGI, and they did like a lot of like interactive things like that.
Yeah, and I thought, again, this is something that like is basically impossible for us to know, but all the different like things that they talked about for like winter survival strategies, they were all like very reasonable inferences to make and stuff, and it very much implied without saying it that the dinosaurs were warm-blooded. They never really talk about that in this at any point. They imply it a little bit in episode 6 as well with the snake, because they talk about it having like heat-sensitive pits on its face, like many snakes do, and then it showed like heat vision of the snake looking at the 2 baby T-Rexes.
Dang, I had my eyes closed for a while. I was also whispering to myself, like, I didn't want any part of it.
So, like, they imply a couple times that the dinosaurs are warm-blooded, which, again, this is, 6 years after Jurassic Park? So, like, that idea had been pitched to the world, but a lot of people still kind of had the perception of dinosaurs as like slow, just big lizards. But obviously you can't live at the South Pole if you are not warm-blooded, really. Or have other ways to deal with it, like Coolosaurus. And at one point they used the term image enhancement to do like night vision to like set the camera. Like
was that also during the snake? Because I don't remember that.
No. This was in the polar episode. So basically, because it's dark, it was like it showed like a very dim image of I don't remember the species that they followed. Some kind of like small ornithopod dinosaur was sort of the main focus, and they did a fine job with it. I didn't really have much to comment about it, but once it transitions to winter and it's fully dark, it showed them doing some things, but it was like super dim, and it was like, with some image enhancement, we can see in the dark.
That's really funny. I did not pick that up at all.
Yeah, I was like, that's why?
I just remember them saying like it'll be months before the sun rises again.
Yeah. And then on to the last episode, the very end of the Cretaceous, which I noticed at the beginning they gave like a location and then a time in like millions of years BC, that it said 65,500,000 years, BC, which I don't remember exactly when it changed, but it is now 66. And I'm not docking a bunch of points, but that was like a big selling point of like Jurassic Park's marketing.
Right, yeah.
The tagline was an adventure 65 million years in the making.
Right. And
that is something that still sticks with a lot of people, mostly because 65 is like a nice round number. Yeah. But it is 66 when it happened. And I'm not saying that to be pedantic. I'm saying that because that's one that in particular that bothers me. Because I still see that. Like, there was a movie that came out like a year or two ago called 65.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm like, okay, well, if it's 65, there will be no dinosaurs then. They went extinct a million years before this. But yeah, so it opens with a mammal, Didelphodon, which is a early marsupial. And I just say Didelphodon. Cute.
It was very cute.
It was very badgery.
Yeah.
Even like the colorings kind of looked like a badger.
Markings.
Like a European badger, not an American badger.
If you were to take like a badger, a possum, and like a raccoon.
Yeah, take a badger and kind of like almost like a badger and a small dog.
Yeah, they just said it was about 20 pounds.
Yeah. No, I think it said 20 kilograms. British.
Ooh, are you sure? Well, I may have multiplied it. So,
I want to say Didelphodon was bigger than you'd think.
Okay, because I just remember vaguely thinking like, oh man, I had a rabbit that size once.
I hope you didn't have a
Flemish giant that was
40-pound rabbit.
Well, no, but I had a Flemish giant that was about 20 pounds.
No, they always said kilograms.
Okay. Well, no, I have no doubt about that, but I'm saying, well, maybe it was like a 10 kilograms, and I, like, did the math.
Maybe. But yeah, so it shows Didelphodon kind of invading what the narrator said was an empty nest. And then the Didelphodon just gets smoked by a T-Rex. And my next thought was, why would a T-Rex care about this? Like, that's another thing that you see.
Maybe that was she was building the nest.
Well, it said it was empty. I don't know.
Well, it was because she was building it. She hadn't laid anything in it yet.
But that's something you see a lot, particularly with dinosaurs, is that they're just kind of shown like they'll eat whatever. And I'm like, you don't see an adult lion eating like flies.
Right.
Like, if it's really hungry, it might go after a mouse. Maybe. But not really.
And yeah.
The whole episode focuses around mostly T-Rex, a couple of other, late Cretaceous mainstays. The only Triceratops we see is dead. But we see a lot of Torosaurus. As well as a couple Hadrosaurs. But they focused a lot on like various like deadly gases and things, which
primarily at the beginning it became less prevalent.
Or just the whole landscape being kind of a hellscape, which I don't think is the modern thinking anymore. Because at the time, before we really understood the meteor impact, because that was not that long before Jurassic Park that we sort of figured that out. And so this was sort of the next big dinosaur thing to kind of hit the mainstream after Jurassic Park. And up till that point, we were all just kind of looking for, I say we as if I was alive, but they were all just kind of looking for why the dinosaurs went extinct. And a big part of it was like, well, in different parts of the world, so there was a lot of like volcanic activity going on in India at the time. But obviously India's not the world. But that was a much larger focus, and I don't know if that was to sort of like be a bit like transition between like, this is probably what most people have heard of, but then at the end, Big Rock.
Yeah, because it ended on the right note.
Yeah.
I just figured that they were trying to let you know that this was kind of like the last episode. Like, we are coming to conclusion. Like, there's struggles going on.
Yeah, but they really made it seem like the environment was just like in absolute shambles.
Yeah.
Which again, that has been an on and off again debate for a long time.
I guess I didn't read it as like, the planet looking like that. I just like, I listened to it as like the section, like wherever this specific, clip was taking place at was, they were going through the struggle, but that could have just been me filling in the blanks because of what made sense to me. No,
like they mentioned several times, like, so the hadrosaurs in the episode, it said at some point, it's like, yeah, these are meant to be living in lush swamps, but now with the environment they're stuck crossing these ashen plains or something to that effect.
Right. In my defense, it was about 3:15, and
it was peak nap time.
It was peak nap time, and I decided not to take a nap today, so
yeah,
I am holding strong.
But yeah, so I think this was probably just in one of those times where, what the metronome going back and forth, it's like, no, the environment was probably pretty tough before the asteroid.
We did them a favor.
Very shrink-wrapped T-Rex, especially the babies. I very much like the more modern depictions of T-Rex. It's just like a absolute unit of chonk.
Chonk.
Yeah. I think that makes way more sense. Let's see, a couple other just last notes here. This is we've been going for a while. It's also very hot in here. It's very hot when we're recording.
I'm sweating.
But we didn't want to turn the AC off in the next room, so we just closed the door. Anyway, another little bit of speculation that, like, I think makes sense. The Torosaurus, it showed them fighting against one another, and they would flush their frills with blood to turn them different colors. That is something we're pretty confident that they did, but they had eye spots on their frills, which I think was really cool and something we can never know, but makes sense. I think it's just a really fun bit.
Yeah. Again, the artistry was incredible.
Yeah. They showed an Ankylosaurus, which looked really tall. It almost looked like spherical.
Is that the one that had the weird arms?
No, that's the clubtail armor.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yep.
But yeah, it literally just looked like a ball that then had the tail.
It very kind of like an armadillo, roly-poly. Like...
Yeah, like it was way taller. Like its back was way taller than I think it actually is. So that one just looked kind of goofy to me.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the one that it ends up whacking the mom.
Yep.
I was awake for that. Yeah, see?
They showed Quetzalcoatlus for just a minute to again mention pterosaurs are gone. It's all birds now, baby. And I also noticed at this point, it never shows a pterosaur eating anything other than fish. It shows one of them trying to eat some bugs from inside a tree. Or I guess some of the little ones, ate bugs off of the Diplodocus in that episode. But if they're not eating bugs, they're eating fish. Which also is just... Quetzalcoatlus was probably a very good, land predator, because it was the size of a giraffe. And had, a 5-foot-long beak, at least. Let's see. It also showed Sarcosuchus, most likely. It never mentioned it, but very large crocodilian in this environment at the time is probably Sarcosuchus. Very large, not quite crocodilian, but very close. 40-foot long, probably.
Yeah, screw that.
Yeah. Never named it. It just showed it as a spooky threat in the water a couple times. Never used CG for it. That was all a puppet both times it was shown, which was fun. It was also bright orange for some reason. Let's see. They showed, like I said, the single snake, which was probably some kind of articulated python or something closely related. Basically just there for the baby T-Rexes to harass.
And harass me. I mean, whatever.
And then it just kind of ends with the meteor impact. And it said they were about 3,000 miles from the impact. And it showed them getting, the mother T-Rex, who had since died, that morning. Getting
coincidence.
Getting getting blown away by the force of it. Full ragdoll. And I'm like, 3,000 miles is a lot. I don't think, especially because it took less than a minute from when it said it hit for the dust and for the mother to be ragdolled away. That's a lot. So I don't know. There is.
And for me, what was so funny though was the mom got hit, gets injured. She dies a slow, agonizing death.
Yep.
She has at least 2 offspring left. She originally had 3. They kind of kicked one out of the group to go,
Yeah, it was a run. It even said it was it was probably killed by the other 2.
Yeah, so that's ambiguous. But then you just have the 2 healthy babies sitting there mom, go feed us. And I just looked at my husband. I was like, how long do you think it's before those babies eat their mom? And then whoosh, mom is gone. I got really loud. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
You can edit that. It's fine.
Yeah.
She got Dorothy DeKansas,
no
Wizard of Oz.
Once the mother got full ragdolled away, I even said out loud, I'm like da na 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 da na 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 na. But yeah, like there is evidence of, because at this time in Earth's history, the center of North America was covered by this like shallow sea that stretched from like the Gulf of Mexico like all the way through Canada, all the way up to the north, and connected like the Northern Ocean with the Gulf of Mexico. And like there's evidence of like tsunamis up in like the Dakotas and stuff from that, of like the waves traveling up through that Western Interior Seaway is what it's called. It wouldn't have happened in a minute. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm sure, but I'm like, give it an hour.
Or just don't say, like, don't give specifics.
Yeah.
Like, that would have been fine, too.
Well, like, and it didn't say a minute. It was like, but it showed, the blinding flash of it hitting the Earth. And then it gave it a few seconds and then felt a shockwave. And then, 10, 15 seconds after that is when this just giant dust cloud. And it's like, people have done the math for how long it would have taken to get to various places. I don't think any of the math says it got to Montana in 30 seconds.
All right, well, I think if they didn't actually, like, verbally list, like, a specific number, then I think it's just, cinematic choice. And
creative license.
Yeah, it doesn't make a difference. Like, you can't...
There might have been for the shockwave. Because it did, like, shaky cam, but... yeah, overall, as we're kind of wrapping up here, I liked it. It was nostalgic. Didn't quite hold up as well as I had thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, because as someone that was watching it for the first time, I'm like, yeah, it was okay. Yeah. It was okay. I think I would have even been happy watching just, like, the last, like, 3 episodes, maybe, like...
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's, I think it was really good for the time. The combination of the puppets and the CG, without obviously having the budget of a Jurassic Park.
Mm-hmm. But also go online and watch Dinosaurs, guys. Yeah, the show.
Oh,
pirate it.
No, it's on Disney Plus.
Yeah. But if you can find it outside of Disney, good for you. Some people still own DVDs of it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I thought it was good, and I'm looking forward to see the next one. I hope that it takes more after this than it does Prehistoric Planet.
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because as much as I did enjoy Prehistoric Planet, I think it made a couple of like missteps in only doing late Cretaceous stuff. And also, like I said, making some
wild,
some
where they're like, "This is fact," and it's like,
right, things that are speculation, that are presented as fact, and you're always going to have some of that with a documentary, but you should try to be as conservative with that as you can,
and open, and like be honest about it,
right? And that's I think that's inherently part of the trouble of doing it like modern nature documentary style.
Yeah.
As if these are lions and elephants instead of dinosaurs. Where it's like, unless you are breaking that fourth wall of saying, hey, this is all fake. Mm-hmm. Which, if that's not the direction you like as a director or whoever makes that decision wants to take the documentary, I don't think that's something you can escape.
Yeah.
So we'll see how this one goes, the new one. We'll watch that sometime in the next few days. It'll be 2 weeks for you guys. But yeah, that's been our thoughts on Walking with Dinosaurs 1999. I'm tired.
I'm sweaty.
I'm very sweaty.
And I'm tired.
And I don't remember how Mike ends the episodes. So, this has been episode 163, there it is, of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Gavin. This has been Liz. We'll be back with you for Walking with Dinosaurs 2025 in 2 weeks' time. And then after that, we'll have a baby. So see you when we see you. Until then, take care, everybody.
Take care.
This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Gavin Davidson and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Fenella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.